Hey there, pen fans. Brian Goulet here from GouletPens.com. I've got another compilation for you. This one spans, a good 13 years or so. So you get to see some Brian of all different ages, shapes, and sizes. But today's theme is all about maintaining and troubleshooting your pens. How to clean out various types of pens, pistons, cartridge converter, etc. How to use various tools for cleaning, maintaining, like brass sheets, micro mesh, and the bulb syringe. How do you keep your pens working well ongoing, or maybe tweak or troubleshoot some of them if it's not writing quite right, or something like that. Of course, if you have any deeper questions in this, you can always reach out to my team over at info@gouletpens.com. Or just look up the Goulet Pen Company on the internet. We're there. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this video. Thanks for watching, and right on. Welcome to the Goulet Pens Fountain Pen 101 series, where you can get all the basics down for learning about how to use fountain pens. I am Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and in part 1, I covered what fountain pens are. Part 2 was about how fountain pens work and their basic parts, and this video is part 3, where I'll be showing you how to clean and maintain your fountain pens for optimal performance. Now, when I talk about cleaning a fountain pen, the basic idea is that you're flushing out whatever ink is in the pen using clean water until all the ink is removed. The style and the design of the pen may dictate the specific methods for how you do this, but essentially you're just repeating the same process as you would to fill your pen with ink, except you'll be filling and flushing the pen with clean water instead. Now, if you've only ever used ballpoint and rollerball pens before, the concept of cleaning a pen may be a bit unfamiliar and maybe even intimidating to you. But I promise it's not that scary. There are just a few basics to understand, and then you'll be up to speed. Fountain pens can differ in their design, but in terms of the cleaning principles, they'll all work pretty similarly. The reason this cleaning process is so important is that it's important to maintain the proper flow of the ink through the pen and ensure that the pen and the ink perform as expected. It generally will only take a couple of minutes to do this, and it's time well spent. Now, I'll make a disclaimer here that fountain pens are designed to be used with water-based fountain pen ink, not calligraphy ink, India ink, acrylic or shellac-based ink of any kind, like what is often found at arts and crafts stores. These types of inks are made for dip pens that are too thick to flow through a fountain pen. If you fill a fountain pen with ink made for dip pens, they'll clog up and you will likely ruin the pen entirely. It's the equivalent of pouring glue into a car engine instead of using oil. So stick to fountain pen ink only. So let's talk about when you should clean your fountain pens. When you first get a pen, it's a good idea to just flush it a couple of times with clean water before you ink it up. This is something most manufacturers recommend because there could be leftover oils or residue from the manufacturing process that you just want to rule out as a factor in case there were to be any flow issues with your new pen. Now, many manufacturers do this themselves already, but it's a good practice to just go ahead and do it with all of your new pens. It's definitely a good idea to clean your pen when you're changing ink colors. Not only might the colors kind of mix together and look vastly different than intended, but some inks don't mix well with each other. And you want to make sure that whatever ink that you last used is completely out of your pen before inking up with something new. It's like if you're using a sealed travel mug for coffee and you don't wash it out before putting tea or water in it. Ugh. Now, if your pen's not been used consistently, or it's just sitting around for a while, the ink may start to sort of dry up in the pen. Fountain pen ink is primarily made of water, which can evaporate over time, though some pens are designed to keep from drying out better than others. Pretty much if your pen hasn't been used in a while and it feels like it's out of ink, or it's writing really dry or skipping while you write, it could just be that it was sitting around a bit too long and could benefit from a cleaning. Or you could also try dipping the nib of the pen back into the bottle of ink, or maybe into a cup of water to kind of get it saturated again. A good rule of thumb for how often to clean a pen is once a month, unless you change colors or you have some performance issue, in which case you'd clean it whenever you have that issue. If the performance of your pen has changed, like you're getting skipping, having hard starts, or you feel like you're having to press down really hard to get ink to come out, all of these are signs that a cleaning might be in order. Cleaning is always a good step to take when you're troubleshooting a fountain pen's writing performance. Just like if you have an electronic device that's acting buggy, it's always good to try rebooting it first, right? So cleaning a fountain pen is essentially like rebooting it. You'll flush out any dried ink or blockages that may have developed over time, and you'll get that ink flowing again as it was originally intended. While most fountain pens can be cleaned in a pretty self-contained manner, there are a few basic tools that you probably already have at your disposal that I think you'll find helpful. Let's start out with clean water. So pen manufacturers recommend using distilled water for cleaning your pens because it has the fewest minerals and contaminants, and that's always a safe bet. However, if you don't have access to distilled water, using bottled or filtered water is often just fine. Use your own judgment about using tap water because water quality varies based on your locality. Just keep in mind that the most important thing is just to clean your pens at all. So use the cleanest water that you have access to. Using any quality of water is still better than not cleaning your pens. 1 or 2 water cups for flushing is helpful. I find cups in the 4 to 12 ounce size is good, but you can use whatever you want. And then having access near a sink is good too. Any cups will do, but just keep in mind you might stain the cups with ink, so dedicating a cup to ink flushing or using disposable cups is usually the best. Absorbent towels. Paper towels or napkins are good, or you can use reusable microfiber or terry cloth towels. All right, so now that you have the basic cleaning setup, let's talk about how you actually clean your pens. One method that many newer people to fountain pens may try or see others doing is rinsing the nib under running water, or maybe dipping it into a cup of water. This is sort of like the equivalent of going for a walk in the rain instead of taking a shower. Yeah, you might be getting your pen wet here, but you're not really cleaning it out. So first, I'll give you a quick rundown of the basic pen cleaning steps. Then we'll go into more detail so that you can reference it if you want some time-saving pro tips, hacks, and methods specific to different filling mechanisms. But first, let's cover the most basic steps universal to cleaning pretty much every fountain pen. Expel the excess ink from the pen, either back into the bottle of ink or down your sink drain. You basically just want to start with an empty pen. Fill and flush your pen with clean water repeatedly until there's no trace of ink. For most pens, this might take 20 or more fill and flush cycles, but it'll vary from pen to pen. If you're changing ink colors, you want to be really thorough and remove all the old color. But if you're inking back up with the same color, you can probably save yourself a little effort and just flush it enough to get the bulk of the old ink out of there. Soak up excess water with a cloth through the nib so you don't have a lot of water in the feed. If you have a few drips of ink left in the pen, don't sweat it, especially if you're going to be inking the pen right back up. And honestly, that's pretty much the process. If this is all you do, you'll be in good shape for about 90% of your pen maintenance. You may be wondering at this point how thoroughly you need to dry your pen after cleaning. Honestly, you don't really have to think too much about it if you're going to be inking the pen back up soon, since it's mostly water that's left in there. Any small droplets in the pen will just mix back in with the new ink, and you really won't even be able to tell. If you know that you're not going to be using the pen for a while and you want to store it away, then maybe leave the pen uncapped, sitting out overnight so it can dry out before you store it. All that said, let's get a little more into the nuance. And if you're new to fountain pens, this is where it might be helpful to save this video and reference back to it when it comes time to clean your pens. So here are some pro tips for cleaning your fountain pens, especially with some more specialized tools and techniques. If you use ink with special characteristics, such as shimmering, sheening, or pigmented ink, thorough cleaning requires some extra steps. Some ink may have a heavy sheen that likes to stick to parts of the pen, which is more visually distracting than actually obstructive to the function of the pen, and it might need some more attention to fully remove. And if you have ink of any type that's dried out in the pen, it can clog up the flow and make it hard to clean out or disassemble. Any of these scenarios may warrant additional cleaning steps like I'm about to mention here. So now I'm going to talk about some of the tools that you can get for these advanced techniques. You might already have some of these around the house, but some of them are a little more specialized to pen cleaning, and we have those available at gouletpens.com individually and in some specialized sets. You may have a bulb syringe around your home already. They're inexpensive and very handy for cleaning. For cartridge converter pens, it's a total game changer, as you can just plug the bulb syringe onto the back of the grip and flush clean water straight through the pen in what would probably take 50 or more fill flush cycles using a converter. And if you like to use just cartridges and you don't have a converter for your cartridge pen, you might need to get a converter just for cleaning it out, or you can alternatively use the bulb syringe. You can always use this bulb syringe on some piston and vacuum filling pens, maybe some other types if you can disassemble the mechanisms. That's a bit more advanced than I wanted to cover in the 101 video, but I at least wanted to mention that it is possible. An ink syringe has a blunt-tipped needle, and it can be helpful in specific circumstances when you're cleaning out ink cartridges that you'd like to refill, or if you wanted to flush out a converter, or maybe a pen body where a bulb syringe is too large to fit. Dish soap is a pretty safe and helpful cleaning agent to add to your cleaning regimen, particularly for when you've maybe waited just a bit too long to clean and your ink isn't flowing so well anymore. It's not going to be the most aggressive cleaning agent, so it does have its limitations. But just putting a few drops of that soap into your cup of water and flushing your pen with it can help clean out some more stubborn ink. You'll still want to flush your pen out with water first to get the bulk of the ink out, then use the water with the dish soap, and then flush it again with clean water as a last step to get all that soap out. Pen Flush is a proprietary mixture of an ink cleaning solution that's slightly more aggressive than dish soap. This is handy for really stubborn and crusty ink, especially if it's completely dried up in your pen. Or maybe you have an ink with some pigment sheen or some other unique characteristic that makes it want to stick around. Just like the dish soap, you'll want to flush it with clean water both before and after using a pen flush. Toothbrushes can actually be helpful when a physical scrubbing is needed, particularly with shimmering and high sheening inks that like to stick to your feed. This usually requires some level of disassembly, so you'll need to make sure that you're comfortable enough removing your nib and your feed on your particular pens and then putting them back. But even if you don't want to take it all apart, a toothbrush can still be used and be helpful in the visible parts of the feed. Cotton swabs are also helpful to have around for scrubbing certain parts of a pen, particularly inside the cap, maybe inside some pen barrels where a toothbrush can't reach. It's also handy for helping soak up some excess water in and on the pen after you've cleaned it. Polishing cloths or jeweler's cloths can be helpful when getting small scratches out of metal pen parts like your nib or the trim, and it might even help shine up certain pen body materials too. Silicone grease is a material that's used to help lubricate certain moving parts of your pen, like piston seals or maybe even the cap threads. While you won't have to use this for a while with new pens, over time it's something that can help keep your pen parts moving smoothly. So far, I've covered pen cleaning pretty well, but I did want to mention a little bit about pen storage before we wrap up here. When using an inked fountain pen, there's no specific orientation that a pen has to be stored, though you may find your own personal preferences here. Some wetter writing pens might do better if stored with the nib towards the sky, like when it's in a pen cup or in a pen stand. But some pens might have a harder time starting if stored like this regularly, since gravity keeps the ink away from the nib. If you store a pen with its nib pointed down towards the ground, gravity will keep that ink in contact with the back of the feed and the nib, which helps it with some pens that might write a little drier. There's somewhat of a downside to storing them this way though, because the clips will take up more room in a pen cup, or it may not fit in a pen stand at all. Now, it's a pretty safe bet for most fountain pens to store them laying down horizontally, as the ink inside will keep more in contact with the feed like when you store it nib down. Just experiment with how you like to keep your pens oriented and see if it makes any difference for you for the pens that you have inked up and ready to go. There's no strict rule here, just do what's most practical for you. Now, something helpful to note is that fountain pens are made to last for many years, even decades. So there are some aspects of their care that matter that you probably haven't considered with using roller balls and ballpoints, especially disposable ones. So here are a few use and care tips that help you to get the most life out of your pens. Don't carry your pens in your pants pocket with hard objects like keys that could scratch your pens. Since fountain pen ink is mostly water, try to avoid storing your pens in extreme cold or extreme heat. Direct sunlight over prolonged periods of time can cause the dyes in your ink to fade, or it could fade some of the color from your pen materials. When carrying your pens, especially particularly expensive or special ones, you may want to invest in some pen sleeves or pen cases. These can vary a lot in style and can hold single pens or your entire collection. It all depends on what best meets your needs. Hey there, pen fans, Brian Goulet here from GouletPens.com. If you just got yourself a TWSBI Eco and you're wondering how you should take it apart, or maybe you took it apart and you're wondering how to get it back together, either way, this video is for you. The TWSBI Eco is a fantastic fountain pen for users of all experience levels, though it's particularly popular among new users due to its affordable price, its reliability, and ease of maintenance. One unique thing that TWSBI does is give you tools and instructions to remove the piston mechanism out of the pen, which gives you the opportunity and the responsibility to disassemble and reassemble your pen. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse, as some pen fans have an easier time disassembling it and reassembling it than others. And that's what this video is meant to show you. Now, I'm gonna go through first with the ideal process of taking it apart and putting it back together for easy step-by-step reference. Then in the back half of the video, I'm gonna show you all the potential things that can trip you up and how to fix them if you find yourself getting stuck. Let's start off by talking about why you'd even want to take your pen apart. Well, firstly, you don't have to. If you know that you're challenged with tinkering and you're kind of hesitant to do this, just don't. Just don't. You can enjoy your Eco just like any other piston filling pen and never take it apart. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, so keep that in mind right off the bat. Now, there are three main reasons why you may want to take it apart, other than just the fact that it's possible. The first reason would be that it makes thorough cleaning easier. It's not hard to clean the pen normally just by flushing and filling the pen with clean water, but because it's a demonstrator, you may find yourself wanting to get it perfectly cleaned out when changing colors, and that's totally up to you. It's not required. Now, sometimes when you see a slight tinge of color from a previous ink inside the pen, it might bother you, but the majority of the time, it's not even the pen itself that's stained. It's the thin coating of silicone grease on the inside of the barrel that might be stained. And that will only remove with a physical scrubbing inside the pen. Now, the vast majority of the time, you won't even see this color tinge when you go to fill your pen with your next ink. But if you want to get it squeaky clean, if you know it's going to bother you, then you'd likely need to take it apart for that reason. The second reason to take it apart would be to clean the pen faster. Now, if you're used to using a bulb syringe with your cartridge converter pens, you can easily get spoiled by being able to flush your pen in under a minute. And pistons may feel like a bit of a chore, like it takes you longer. Now, by removing the piston mechanism on your Eco, you can flush it out just like you would a cartridge converter, which I won't lie, is pretty appealing. It's the main reason why I disassemble most of my Ecos. The third reason is for maintenance. Now, with normal use, your Eco is going to last a long time without any special maintenance needed. However, over time and repeated use, the silicone grease on it will, maybe break down, not work quite as well, and that rubber piston seal, it's not going to move quite as smoothly as when it was new, making it feel just a little more resistant as you're operating it. By taking it apart, you can re-grease that piston seal, and TWSBI even supplies their own silicone grease, or you could use your own, and it'll keep it smooth and operating like new for years and years. So with all this in mind, let's go step by step in removing and replacing the Eco piston as TWSBI instructs. To disassemble and reassemble, you'll only need two things: your Eco pen and the red TWSBI wrench that comes with it. Now, this is an 8mm wrench. It's only about 1mm thick, and it's sort of a specialized wrench, so hang on to them with your Eco even if you throw out the rest of your packaging. Though if you're like me, you'll probably end up with a drawer full of these things. You can also use the 8mm metal TWSBI wrench that comes with any other TWSBI pen. They'll work just the same. All right, here's how to take your Eco apart step by step. Step 1, expel any remaining ink and flush your pen with clean water. Now, it's best to work with an empty and clean pen unless you're disassembling it expressly for the purpose of cleaning it out. Step 2, remove the cap and set it aside. Step 3, twist the filler knob counterclockwise until the piston is all the way down towards the grip of the pen. Step 4, insert your wrench into the notches on the black piston mechanism. Step 5, this one's really important and where most people cause themselves issues. Once you put the wrench on, twist the knob back down in a clockwise motion until it pinches down slightly on the wrench. This will cause the piston to back away around a centimeter from where it was fully extended. This not only helps hold the wrench on the piston mechanism as you're unscrewing it, but it also makes sure that the entire mechanism will come out and stay in one piece. Step 6, remove the piston mechanism. Hold the Eco body with one hand and turn the wrench clockwise 9 full rotations. You can then pull the mechanism straight out of the pen in one piece and leave it intact. Now this is really important. You don't need to take the piston mechanism apart.
You don't need to take the piston mechanism apart. You don't need to take the piston mechanism apart.
You can keep it all together in one piece. There's really no benefit to disassembling at this point, and it's just gonna start to get confusing for you. But if you end up doing it anyway, I'm gonna cover that later in the video, and you can watch it there, but just know that you have no need to take the mechanism all the way apart, and I don't recommend that you do. So once you have that apart, you can do whatever you need to. You can clean it, re-grease it, whatever. And I'll cover all those steps here in just a minute, but let's talk about reassembling it now. Here are the steps to do that, one step at a time, but it's basically just doing everything we did, but in reverse. Step 1, insert the piston mechanism into the body. With the wrench attached to the piston, insert the rubber seal in the barrel and push the mechanism down until it stops. Step 2, screw the piston mechanism into the body. Turn the wrench counterclockwise 9 rotations until you feel resistance. Do not, and I repeat, do not over tighten this. That will put increased pressure on the threads, and that can weaken the plastic over time, causing cracks to form. You don't have to hulk this thing in place. Once it starts to feel tight, you can stop. Step 3, remove the wrench by first turning the filler knob counterclockwise just a little bit, enough to free up the wrench. Then you can simply slide the wrench off of the piston, and then you'll be good to fill your pen. You can operate the piston just like normal.
Wow, Brian, that seems pretty simple. How could you possibly mess that up?
I'm glad you asked, Brian. There's lots of ways you can mess it up, and people do it all the time.
It's all good. We're gonna cover everything about how you could maybe get off track here, but I'm gonna show you the different situations that you might find yourself in and how to get out of them. Let's cover a couple of the most common oopsies that you might find yourself in. Oops number 1, you removed the piston, but the piston rod is still in the pen. This happens all the time. And basically it's when the piston rod is fully extended and then you unscrew the mechanism out of the body and the threads that grip the piston rod aren't holding onto it anymore and you've left the rod back in the pen. Trying to pull the rod out with your fingers is tough because it's set down in the pen. And I guess theoretically you could use a pair of needle nose pliers or something else really thin to kind of pinch it and get it out of there, but that's risky. You could damage the piston rod because it's just made of plastic. No, the simplest and the easiest thing to do is just to reinsert the piston mechanism back into the pen. Make sure the piston rod lines up with that shape of the end of the mechanism. Screw the mechanism back onto the pen in a counterclockwise rotation, and then when it's fully screwed on, then you turn the filler knob counterclockwise so it clamps down onto the wrench and it moves the piston slightly up. Now you've got that mechanism all in one piece. You can turn the wrench clockwise and remove it just like normal. Oops number 2, you've removed the piston mechanism, but it's no longer in one piece and you need to get it back together. So you remember earlier when I said that you don't need to take the mechanism apart? I'll say it again, truly you don't need to. But hey, things happen. Or maybe you were just curious and you wanted to see how it worked. I get it, I'm a tinkerer, I do the same thing. But now you've opened up a little Pandora's box and you need to understand how the parts of the piston mechanism all fit together in order to get it aligned like you need. So we're gonna cover a lot of different things. You could end up in all different situations, but basically you've disassembled some part of your mechanism and you're gonna have to get it all back together. So you have technically 5 parts to the piston. The rubber piston seal, which is going to be attached to the threaded piston rod. You have the filler knob, the piston housing, which has 2 sets of threads on the outside of it, and the piston rod shroud, which sits inside the piston housing. It's usually just completely hidden. Now the piston housing is static. That's what actually stays in place on the back of the pen, and it holds all the parts together. And the filler knob is going to screw up and down on that piece. The piston rod fits into the slotted end of the housing, and the piston rod shroud threads through the other end onto the piston rod. That's what actually makes the piston go up and down, is that piston rod and the shroud working together. That's really the heart of the whole mechanism. So the way that the piston mechanism is assembled is by first inserting the piston rod shroud into the open end of the housing on the back of it. It should just slide right in, very little friction. Then you screw the filler knob onto the housing by turning it clockwise, just threading it on there. Now as it screws on, there are detents that will fit between the piston rod shroud and the filler knob. You can sort of see them matching up together, especially if you have a demonstrator version. Now this means that when you turn the knob, the shroud is also going to be turning inside that housing. And because that shroud turns, the threads inside the shroud are going to match up to the piston rod and make it move up and down. That's sort of how the whole thing works. So the tricky part here is going to be that this filler knob, as you're turning it and screwing it down further onto the piston housing, you're turning it clockwise. And because it's turning the shroud, that means that when the piston rod is inserted, the piston rod will be moving inversely to the filler knob in opposite directions. So this means that there's a very specific placement that needs to happen where the piston rod is going to fit in, so that the end result, when everything is screwed together and assembled, that filler knob is going to be seated fully on the housing, while the piston seal is just about 1 millimeter or 2 away from the piston housing. It's fairly easy to have it where that piston is either sticking too far out or too far in, and then the pen's not going to work as intended. It is very confusing, I know. Hopefully it's not that confusing. Hopefully being able to show it here will make it a little easier, but rewatch this as many times as you need to. And I will note here that we have a customer care team here that troubleshoots this kind of stuff all the time, and they are more than happy to help you should you find yourself needing like a little more personalized instruction. Okay, so now knowing the end state of where we need this mechanism to be, here are my tips for making this as least painful as possible, going step by step. Step number 1, make sure the piston seal is seated fully onto the piston rod and set it aside. Step 2, insert the piston rod shroud into the open end of the piston housing on the back of it. Step 3, in a clockwise motion, screw the filler knob onto the piston housing over top of the piston shroud until you have a 2.5 millimeter gap between the end of the piston knob and the thickest part of that piston housing. That sounds very specific because it is. Now, you can use 2 US dimes stacked on top of one another to get the right spacing, or take a 2.5 millimeter hex wrench or an Allen wrench if you have one of these handy. You can use these somewhat relatively common household items to get that proper spacing between the knob and the housing, since, trying to gauge 2.5 millimeters exactly is kind of hard to eyeball it. Step 4, insert the piston rod into the slotted end of the piston housing and hold it there with your finger. Step 5, turn the filler knob clockwise until it's seated fully onto the housing. When the filler knob is fully seated, you should have about a 2.5 millimeter spacing between the piston seal and the piston housing. If the knob is fully seated and the piston seal is too far away, that means you might need to try this again. So inserting the rod a little bit deeper. I like to do this by holding the piston down while I unscrew the filler knob until it kind of overextends and you get a little click, and then you try screwing it back together again. It pretty much just takes some trial and error, but eventually you can get that spacing right. Now, if the piston itself is all the way down on the housing, but the filler knob is loose and it's not all the way attached to the housing, you're gonna need to disassemble it and try again. This time with the knob starting just a tad closer to that final closed position of the housing. Step 6, once you have the final assembled housing, you're gonna unscrew the filler knob slowly, just enough so that you can get your wrench in place. Make sure that that piston rod stays installed and doesn't fall out. And then tighten the knob down on the wrench. Step 7, insert the piston mechanism into the body of the pen and turn the wrench counterclockwise 9 rotations until it's gently tightened, and then you're all set. Okay, before I end the video, I'm gonna show you some pro tips for cleaning and greasing the pen, sort of skipping over the step-by-step of the disassembly and assembly, since you've mastered that at this point, for the sake of brevity. Expel the excess ink from your pen, but you don't have to clean it out. Take your dirty but empty Eco, remove the cap, and go through all the steps to remove that piston mechanism that we just covered. Now, once you're left with just the body, you can flush the pen with a bulb syringe just like you would any cartridge converter pen. You can fill the bulb syringe and just flush it on through there as many times as you want. Now, if there's ink on the walls of the pen and it's still kind of like got its color tinge to it, you can scrub it with a cotton swab to clean it up, from the open end of the pen where the mechanism would normally be. And then just rinse off the piston seal, and once you're happy with how clean the pen is overall, go through all the steps to reassemble it like we just covered. Greasing the piston seal. Now this is generally best to do when you have a clean pen. So you can do this in the cleaning process, or if you have your pen already cleaned, remove the piston mechanism from the pen, and then using either the TWSBI supplied grease, which is relatively thin, or another silicone grease like our thicker Goulet silicone grease, you can apply it with a toothpick or a cotton swab to that rubber piston seal. You put this in between the two rings on the seal, get a little bit on the rings, but most of it's gonna be kind of in between them. And then you want to use enough to cover it all, but don't glob it on there so thick that it's gonna smear everywhere when you go to reinstall it in the pen. If you're not quite sure how much to put on, err on the side of putting too little, because if you don't use enough, then it'll just feel like you haven't really done anything. But if you put too much, it can sort of glob in there and get places you don't want to, get all in the threads. It's a little bit more trouble to clean it out extra than it is to add a little bit more. But either way, it's not an exact science. Carefully reinsert it back into the pen and just do your reassembly process like normal. Now, there's no set amount of time that you need to adhere to when re-greasing the piston like this. You definitely don't need to do it every time you take the pen apart. Basically, you just do it when you feel like you're having to work a little bit harder than normal to get that piston going. But you got pretty much freedom to do it however as much as you want. And there you have it. I hope this was thorough enough to cover whatever situation that you find yourself in, but also concise and simple enough for you to kind of get it all. Hi, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company in Ink Nouveau, and today I'm going to cover Goulet Pen Flush. Now, Pen Flush is a cleaning solution that's used to help to clean out your pens. And there's a couple of things I'm going to cover in this video specifically. First thing I'm going to cover is why you need to clean your pens and how often is the appropriate time to do it, why you would need a flush as a part of that pen cleaning regimen, and then how to actually use the flush. So normally, using just plain water is fine when cleaning out your fountain pens. You can use tap water if you've got relatively clean water where you are, distilled water if you have really hard water. That's what I usually recommend. So why do you need a flush? Well, there's a few instances where a flush is really helpful. If you have a pen that has not been cleaned in a very long time and you feel like it probably needs a little extra something just to get it back up to where it needs to be, that's where a flush can really help. If you have a pen that you let the ink sit in it a little too long without using it and it's kind of dried up in the pen, water may not quite cut it and you may need a little something extra. And also if you have a particular ink that happens to be a little more stubborn than some others, a flush can really help to get it clean, especially if you have, some clear components of the pen that you're trying to get back to looking clear again. With some inks, they tend to want to stick a little bit, and the flush can really help to move those along. So those are the times when it's most ideal to bring a flush into your pen cleaning regimen. If you order your flush from Goulet, this is what the packaging is going to look like. We've got a blue, of course, 8-ounce plastic bottle with a twist top, and it also accompanied by a little spare vial here down on the bottom that we've taped. Try to make it easy for you to take it off. It's the same vials that we use for our ink samples. Very durable, nice, leak resistance vial. It's nice for storing your flush in for an individual pen basis. This is kind of the main bottle that you're going to work from, and this is the one where you're actually going to do the cleaning of your pen. Now, of course, if you don't want to use this vial specifically, or if you have a huge pen that doesn't fit in this one, you can use whatever container you want, a Dixie cup, whatever. If you have a different type of vial, you're more than welcome to do that. This is just what we supply because we find that it works pretty well. This vial is about a 1/2 inch in diameter, so it fits just about all pens except for the very largest of them. So keep that in mind. But the whole idea behind the Goulet flushing system here, this is built upon what I naturally felt was the best system for me when it came time to clean my pens. What I like to do is I like to take the vial and fill it about 4 milliliters, and then I leave this vial, around the house. I might have a couple of vials actually, and I'll keep one, kind of at every sink that I have in the bathroom, in the kitchen, or whatever. And I will decant the flush into the smaller vial, and then I can flush from my pen using only this vial, and I don't have to worry about the big bottle except when it comes time to refill with my flush. The flush does start to look kind of gross even after the first time that you use it. You can use it more times after that, but it starts to look a little gross, and even though I know that it's getting dirty every time you use it anyway, and you can just reuse dirty stuff, it's not going to make too big of a difference, I don't think. I still don't like the idea of mixing certain types of inks when I'm cleaning out my pens and things like that, so I tend to like to use the smaller vial and then flush it out more often. When it comes time to actually clean a pen with the flush, let's assume that this is a pen, I've got a Lamy 2000 here. This is a pen that I've been using for a while. I'm going from a really dark ink to a really light one, and even though it's flowing properly, I just want to use the flush to try to get as much of the old ink out as I possibly can before I switch to my new one. So essentially I'm just going to use the flush as a regular part of my cleaning process and just try to get a little of the excess ink that may be left in there from the previous one before I move to my new one. So I've already taken and I've filled about 4 milliliters worth into my vial. So I'm going to take my bottle and set it aside. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my pen just like I normally would. I've got a cup of water here. If I was by the kitchen sink, I would have a cup of water and I'd be using the sink, but since I don't have a sink here handy with me, I'm just going to use an extra cup. So the way that I like to clean my pens, this is a piston fill pen, so it actually has a screw piston mechanism built into the pen. If you were using a cartridge converter, you may be taking the pen more apart to get to the insides, but the concept is going to be very much the same. So I'm going to move my piston all the way down by unscrewing the knob. Then I'm just going to dip it into my water, and I'm going to fill it with water. Now you can expel back into the same water, but when I'm in a situation like this where I don't have a lot of access to clean water, if I was by the sink, it might be a different story. I would just do this, dump it out, and not think about it. But I'm actually going to dump it into a separate cup because I know that I have a pretty decent amount of ink in the pen right now. So I don't want to contaminate my water any more than I have to. So I'm getting a little bit of ink in there, but basically I'm just going to take and fill and dump. And I'll just do that a couple of times until I feel that I've gotten, at least the main part of the ink out. And I'm keeping an eye on how blue that water is. What a surprise, I'm using blue ink. I'm even wearing a blue shirt as I'm recording this, but so the water is getting it cleaner. It's not quite as blue as it has been. Okay, now it's getting to be pretty clean. So I think now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start screwing and unscrewing back into the same cup. Again, I'm not going for ultimate cleanliness here because I'm not going straight to using my next ink color after this. This is really just to try to get as much of my blue ink out of here before I switch to probably another blue, if I'm being honest. But anyway, okay, so now I feel like it's pretty clear. And if you ever want to do a test for how clean your pen really is, just take a paper towel and take your nib and touch it to the paper towel. If you see a lot of the color of ink coming out, it'll be pretty diluted, but if you see the color of the ink coming out as you touch it to the paper towel, then you need to clean it some more. Okay, right now mine's pretty clear, so I think I'm pretty good to go. Now it's time to move on to the flush. I've cleaned my pen with regular water. Now it's time to flush it out. Now, if you want to, you can use some kind of rig to hold this in place. I know a lot of folks have, a lot of ink samples, and so you may have something like this, the vial holder. You can just unscrew the cap and drop that in place, and then you have two hands free to operate your pen. Or if you don't have one of these, that's perfectly fine. It's not necessary. You can just hold it with your hand. It may require a little bit more dexterity, but basically you're going to take and kind of hold it in your hand like this. Then you have your fingers free to kind of hold the tip of your pen. Okay, it's not super complicated, but it does require a little bit of skill. And the reason that I do 4 milliliters, and even maybe a little less depending on the design of your pen, is that when you go to stick the pen in there, it's going to displace. See, I could even go a little lower with this Lamy 2000. So I'm going to want to be careful about where I hold this pen in the vial, because what I don't want to do is jam it all the way down into the bottom and then have flush coming out over the top. That would be kind of annoying. So I'm going to refrain from doing that. So I'm just going to kind of hold it in place. I'm sucking it up in there, and then I'm going to just expel it back into the vial. And you can see I've got some blue coming out. Even though that water looked clean, and even though when I touched it to the paper towel, I didn't see any blue, I'm still getting a nice bluish tint to the flush. So there's no right or wrong answer about how many times that you should do this. Really just do whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, if you have been using the same color regularly and you're just doing a regular maintenance clean, you probably don't need to do any more than 5 or 10 flushes like this in order to get it clean. If it's really caked up and dirty, it's not a bad idea to fill it and kind of leave it sitting in there for a while. If it's really bad and your pen is constructed in such a way that you're able to actually remove the grip section, you can actually drop it in this vial, screw it on there, and store it for overnight or a day or two to really try to get any caked up mess that might be in there. But you're going to have to just kind of gauge that based on your individual needs for that pen. And then I've got a nice bluish tint to it. Now you can imagine if I was using the whole bottle like this, it would be giving a bluish tint to the entire bottle. Not that you'd really be able to tell with this bottle, but even still, I like the idea of having a cleaner flush that I'm using on a regular basis. So this is still not that dirty, really. I can use this for several more cleanings before I feel that I need to dump it. Basically, you just kind of use the gross test. If you look at it and it grosses you out, dump it, and then you can fill it again. Now what you want to do is make sure that after you've flushed it out, that you're using clean water, and you're just going to take it and fill and flush using the clean water to get all of that residual flush out of there. Now there shouldn't be any ink color left in here at all, because the flush should have gotten it all. If you have a really, if you've been using the flush for a really long time and there's actual tint to the flush itself, it may have an appearance of some color to it, but that's going to depend how long you choose to use it. But after this initial step, your pen should be completely clean. Okay, so I just do it a few times, and then after I get it all clean, I again take my paper towel to it. Not that there was any ink in there in the first place, but touching my paper towel to it should be perfectly clean. And that's about as clean as you're going to get any pen. Hey, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and Ink Nouveau, and today I'm going to be talking about micromesh. Micromesh is a fine abrasive that you use to smooth out your fountain pen nib if you feel that it has any scratchiness to it. It's really not a super fine honing tool in terms of getting a pen glassy smooth or anything like that, But if you have a pen that you feel is scratchy, or especially if it's inconsistent writing, like scratchy in one direction over another, micro mesh could very well help you out. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do in this video today. So why do you need micro mesh? Well, usually you don't, okay? Fountain pens in a perfect world should write exactly as you feel they should, and you should never have a problem. Well, that's not always the case, especially if you're buying cheaper pens. Quality control may be somewhat inconsistent, and it may just not write as smoothly as you would like it to. Well, usually the first thing you want to do is grab your loop and check the nib tines for alignments. You want to make sure that one is not off and dragging on the paper and making it feel scratchy. If that's the case, then micro mesh isn't going to help you at all, and in fact it could ruin your nib if you don't have your tines properly aligned. I would say probably 90% or so of all scratchiness can be fixed just with a simple tine alignment, which doesn't void any warranty. It doesn't cause you any problems, and it's minimal hassle as long as you have some kind of magnification to see it. But for those times when you have it properly aligned and it still feels scratchy and you have no idea why, it could very well be that micro mesh could be your answer to get your pen writing as you want it to. Now I do want to give you proper warning here. This is my disclaimer of sorts for this video. Micro mesh is an abrasive. It is modifying your nib, and it will pretty much void any pen manufacturer's warranty. So you want to make sure that if you're using this, that you know what you're doing. Practice on cheap pens first, or pens that are out of warranty or that you're going to throw away anyway. Make sure that you're not taking your great grandfather's pen that was passed down through your family and throwing that on this stuff without knowing what you're doing. In fact, some pens you're probably never going to want to use with micro mesh, just because it is possible to do damage that you would need a professional to fix by using micro mesh. So you want to make sure that you are really just kind of being conservative. And if you're not comfortable using it at all, just don't. Really, it's kind of a tinkerer's tool and something that you should feel comfortable using if you're even going to attempt it. So there's my little disclaimer. This is micro mesh. This is something that we offer through gouletpens.com. This is a 6-inch by 3-inch rectangle of micro mesh. It's a 12,000 grit. You can see that on the back here. But it's not the same grit that you have with sandpaper. The 12,000 grit equates to about 2 microns, which a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. So that is pretty darn small. And that basically refers to, the size of the actual abrasive particle that's adhered to this cloth backing. The 12,000 grit refers to how many of those little particles are in 1 square inch. So it's pretty fine. It doesn't even feel like an abrasive. It feels almost kind of like leather or suede, but I promise you, it's abrasive. And the whole point of the micro mesh is that you are going to write on it with your fountain pen in order to smooth out any inconsistencies or any scratchiness that you might have on the tip of your fountain pen nib, so that it feels, pretty much as you feel that it should. It's kind of a repair tool if you want to think about it like that. It's to get your pen to a non-scratchy state. It's not going to get it to feel glassy smooth. That's where Mylar paper would come in. But micro mesh will get you, pretty much to where you want to go. It'll feel smooth with a touch of feedback, with a touch of resistance to it. So kind of like maybe a graphite pencil will feel. You'll feel a little bit of drag when you've honed it with the micro mesh here. All right, so let's walk through the steps that you want to do when you're using micromesh to smooth your nib. The first thing you want to do, if is obviously use the pen and see if it feels scratchy to you. Usually if it feels scratchy, it'll feel scratchy in one direction or another. That's because the nib consists of two tines that join together, and there's usually one that's higher or one that's lower. That's called a misalignment, and that you want to try to knock that out before you get to the point where you're doing any kind of smoothing. So it's good to grab a loop, such as the Goulet loop or whatever loop that you use. It's essentially a magnifying glass. Whatever you're comfortable with. So you want to look in here and you want to see and make sure that the tines of your nib are actually properly aligned. So on this one, they are pretty well aligned. So I'm just using this as an example. This is a Goulet nib that I have on a Noodler's Ahab pen. This is kind of just for demonstration purposes. It's not actually scratchy, but I'll give you the idea. So I've got proper alignment. That's great. You can check the Goulet loop video to see how to actually do the alignment. But now we're at the point where, okay, we know we're aligned. It's feeling scratchy. I'm comfortable working on this because I know I'm going to be responsible for anything that I do to it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to ink this thing up. So, different pens will ink up different ways, but, fill your pen with whatever method is required. Now, as far as the ink choice goes, I've got Noodler's Black here. I know a lot of people have their own preferences for what ink they want to recommend. A lot of nibmeisters that do nib tuning and stuff all the time will have their own individual preferences. I wouldn't say that any one ink is better than another. Really it comes down to what are you comfortable with and what ink do you use a lot? What ink do you feel comfortable with because you use it, more than some others. So I would tend to recommend to use an ink that you use a lot and that you're very comfortable with. And that could vary for a lot of different people. So I don't think there is any one answer for the right ink to use. I have Noodler's Black because I have a lot of experience with it in a lot of different pens. I've done the Nib Nook writing sample of every pen that we have at gouletpens.com. I've done all of that in Noodler's Black on Rhodia paper. So I am very comfortable with how Noodler's Black should feel on Rhodia paper. So that's why I'm going to use that for my own one. And then the Goulet nib, this is just one I chose for demonstration purposes, but I'm also pretty comfortable using that one. So I'm using an Ahab here. It's a piston filler with a plunger here. I'm not going to fill it all the way, but there you go. You get the idea. And I forgot a paper towel, because I always do, but there we go. Just wipe off my nib. Okay, so that's how you fill a pen in like 5 seconds. But anyway, so the first thing I want to do once I have my pen inked up is to make some figure eights on some paper. Now it can be whatever paper you're comfortable using. I find it's best to use something consistent, to use something that I'm comfortable with, that I know how it should feel, something that is consistently made. That's why I really like Rhodia. By the way, this is a broad nib I'm using here, so that's why it looks so very bold. But let's say, as an example, okay, that this nib feels a little bit scratchy. What I want to do is I want to take my micro mesh and I want to do that same figure eight pattern. You can see I've got a little figure eight here already. And you want to keep it inked up. This is kind of a fresh piece of micro mesh. I did a little bit of dry writing on it with that figure eight. But you just want to, kind of hold it down and make some figure eights. Okay, and you want to go pretty slow. You don't want to do a lot of them, okay, just a few. And then bring it back to your paper and make some more figure eights. If you find that, for example, it's scratching going from right to left, if you find that that's where it's scratching, that usually means that one of the tines needs a little more work than the other. And you can kind of just go and do that motion a few times just to work on that one. And try it again. See if that helps at all. If you find it needs some more, just bring it back. Do some more. And the ink in this case is actually acting like kind of a lubricant. If you're using it dry, then essentially when you are doing your figure eights or your hash marks or whatever, then the metal that you're grinding off of the nib could grind it a little more aggressively. I have a woodworking background, and You know, whenever you are sanding something, if you are sanding something that has particles that could come out, it's usually better to try to sand it wet. You know, whenever you're sanding anything like any wood finishes or stuff, it's always better to sand it wet. Same concept here. The ink kind of keeps it lubricated. So whatever you feel, the figure 8 should give you a pretty full range of what you should be feeling. And you don't really need to work on different parts of the micro mesh. You know, you might have certain parts that'll wear down over time, but really you just kind of keep going until you feel comfortable, until you feel that you've worked out all of the rough spots, if you will. And then pretty much once you feel like it doesn't feel scratchy anymore, you want it to feel consistent. And really the advantage that you have by doing this yourself is you are going to be holding the pen the way that you like to write with it. So as you're doing your figure 8s, you know, if you want to, you can kind of lower the pen angle, you can raise the pen angle a little bit to try to smooth out different parts of the nib. But really pretty much you want to keep it as you are going to be writing with it. So as you're doing your figure 8s, you are going to be honing it to your specific writing preference. And then really that's about it. You don't want to go too aggressively. You know, it's really good to stay and, you know, do a couple, go back, do a couple, go back. And you never really want to press into it. You're pretty much just letting the weight of the nib itself determine how much pressure you're putting on the micro mesh. If you push too aggressively, it is easy to overdo it. If you do too many figure 8s without going back and checking the paper, it is easy to overdo it. If you overdo it, you can end up with flow issues with your ink. And that's really not something that you want. So you really just want to make sure that you're being careful, you're checking to make sure that you're you know, liking how it feels, and stop when you've worked out the scratch. Now really what's going to happen once you get to the point where you have worked out any scratches is you're going to feel it's relatively smooth. You know, it may be smoother than you've ever known before if you don't have a lot of experience with, you know, properly writing pens. If you want to get really, really smooth, that's where, you know, something like Mylar paper would come in, and that's this stuff here. That I'm not going to get into on this video, but that is how you hone it further. You're only going to be able to get so smooth with micro mesh, okay? So you want to go with essentially a finer grit abrasive, which is what that Mylar paper is for. But the micro mesh should be able to knock out any scratches that you're dealing with. Once you're done with your smoothing on your micro mesh, it's pretty much a good idea to take a brass sheet, if you have it handy, and just take it and floss it in the tines of your nib. You know, if you're using it inked up, there shouldn't be too much residual metal shavings or anything that's coming off of the nib and getting up in your tines. But really, it's just kind of a handy thing to do. You know, if you don't have any brass sheet, I wouldn't sweat it too much, but if you have brass sheet handy, definitely take and just floss the nib like that a few times before you go on about your writing, just to make sure you've cleared it through and you're good to write. It's not a bad practice whenever you're doing any kind of nib smoothing to take and floss it with the brass. And then once you're done, you know, you're going to have some ink left on your micro mesh here. Just take a paper towel or something and you can kind of dab up the excess. You know, you can use a little bit of water and wipe it away. You are going to have some ink left on there, and after you use this thing for a while, it's going to look really just disgusting, and it's going to be covered in figure 8s and marks and different color inks possibly. That's okay. You know, this micro mesh will last a really good time. Theoretically, you know, it will wear away over time, and you may want to replace it at some point. But honestly, unless you're doing, you know, hundreds of nibs, you're probably never going to need to replace it unless you lose it or something like that. It's really pretty long lasting, some pretty durable stuff. So one sheet should really pretty much last you the rest of your life. Hello, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and Ink Nouveau, and today I'm going to be talking about Mylar paper. This is a super fine abrasive paper that you use to smooth out your fountain pen nibs. This is not necessarily a repair tool so much as it is a refinement tool. If you have a nib that's already performing well and you want to make it super glassy smooth, that's where Mylar will help you out. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to use Mylar paper. Mylar paper is not something that everybody has in their toolkit, but it's something that I think a lot of people will want. So I sourced this out and we're selling it at gouletpens.com, and it is available in 2 different grit sizes. The green one here is a 1 micron grit and the white one is a 0.3 micron grit. Now a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter, so that's how big the abrasive is. The little, particles on this paper, that's how big it is. It's very, very, very small. Very smooth stuff. It doesn't even feel like an abrasive. It kind of feels just like it feels smoother than a piece of paper even. But I promise you that it will do stuff to your metal fountain pen nib. Basically, if you have a really a fountain pen nib that doesn't feel scratchy necessarily, but just isn't quite as smooth as you want it to be. That's where Mylar can really help you out. It can get your nib to that super glassy, smooth state that some people prefer. And I'm going to show you how to use it. Now, of course, I have to give a disclaimer here because with Mylar paper, you are actually, though not to a great degree, you are actually modifying your fountain pen nib. And if you are dealing with a pen manufacturer and your pen is still covered under warranty, they would consider this voiding the warranty on your nib. Doing any kind of repair or adjustment or refinement or nib smoothing, anything like that, they don't really like that. So make sure that you're only doing this on pens that you feel comfortable working on and that you're willing to accept full responsibility for if you happen to take it too far. Now, Mylar paper is not a very aggressive tool for your fountain pen nib, so I think in general you're pretty safe, but realize that you can't hold me responsible for anything that you do to your nib. So, I wouldn't offer it if I didn't feel that it was of benefit and that most people could use it responsibly. However, make sure that you know what you're doing and make sure that you take it slow and only work on pens, that are more or less something that you would feel comfortable working on yourself and wouldn't be devastated if you happen to make a mistake. So this is the Mylar paper that you're going to get if you buy it through gouletpens.com. It's 2 different grits. It's about a 4x6 size, pretty close to it there. And it is very, very thin. In fact, it's kind of translucent. You can even see through it a little bit. There's actually 2 sides to it. There's this one very shiny side, and there's this one less shiny side. The less shiny side is the one that has the abrasive on it. That's going to be your working side. If you're trying to smooth your nib on this shiny side, you're not going to get very far because you're essentially just trying to shine it on a piece of plastic. But the non-shiny side is the one that's going to be your working side. So this green sheet is your 1 micron and this white sheet is your 0.3 micron. This is the finer abrasive. So the white is kind of the one that if you really, really want to make your nib smooth, that's what the white's for. Usually you want to start with the green, okay? So if your nib is pretty smooth and generally okay, the green will get you really smooth. And if you want absolutely smooth as it can get pretty much, that's where the white is going to come into play. All right, so now it's time to cover the steps you're actually going to go through when it comes time to smooth your nib with Mylar paper. I'm going to start out with the green, so I'm going to set the white aside. And I've got a pen here. You want to ink up your pen, okay? This is just a Noodler's Ahab that I have. I actually have a Goulet nib installed in here. It's for demonstration purposes. The Goulet nibs come pretty smooth. They come about as smooth as you would get if you were smoothing it out with micro mesh, which I cover in another video. But micro mesh is a different abrasive here. This is more of a more aggressive. It's about twice the grit size of the bigger grit Mylar paper. So it's a more aggressive approach. That's really for repairing scratchy nibs. But if you want to take a smooth writing nib and make it even smoother, the 1 micron is where you want to start. When it comes to choosing an ink, really want to work with something you're comfortable with. I have done a writing sample of every nib that we have at gouletpens.com with Noodler's Black. So I feel really comfortable using Noodler's Black. If you're comfortable with something else, by all means, use whatever is going to feel good to you and that you have a lot of experience with. Same thing goes with paper. Use a paper that you're comfortable with and that you feel is consistent and that you have experience with. I've used Rhodia paper, probably more than anything else. So I'm very comfortable with it. So I've inked up my pen with my nib that I would like to smooth to a greater degree. And I'm going to first just make some figure eights, make sure my ink is flowing well, get a sense for how smooth the nib is just on its own on the paper. Okay. I'm just trying to, make simple figure eights. And the reason I like the figure eight pattern is because you get kind of the full range of the nib, because you're kind of moving it in every direction as you're doing these figure eights. Then you want to kind of take it and with it still inked up, you just put your Mylar on a flat surface of some kind, a desk or something like that, table, and you want to do the same figure eight pattern on the Mylar. Now, it doesn't really matter how big your figure eights are necessarily, just something that's comfortable to you. And you want to take it generally pretty slow. I like to do like maybe 2 or 3 eights and then bring it back to the paper. And then if I want to make it a little smoother, I bring it back to the Mylar again. Now, as far as hand position goes, it's pretty much however you naturally hold your pen. You're the one that's holding it, you're the one that's smoothing it, so really whatever feels comfortable for you, that's how you should be working. But you want to hold your pen just as you normally would while you're writing and make those figure eights. And just kind of keep going back and forth between the Mylar and the paper until you really are happy with how it's feeling. Now, this is pretty darn smooth, but let's say I want this to be even smoother. I'm going back and forth, I'm doing the figure eights, and I feel it's kind of peaked out in terms of how smooth it is. Now, this is already pretty darn smooth, but I want to take it even smoother. I'm going to break out my white, my 0.3 micron, and I'm going to do just the same thing. Simple figure eight pattern. Bring it back to my paper. The reason it's nice to have the pen inked up is the ink kind of acts as a lubricant to make sure that it's clearing away any very, very fine metal that's being essentially polished off as you're doing these figure eights. If you were to do it dry, then theoretically the metal that's being polished away could kind of clog up your slit of your nib. It could, kind of affect the feel. Using it inked up will get you more desirable result than if you were to just do it dry. And I'm just kind of keep going back and forth until I feel really, really comfortable with it. Now you will be able to get this nib to be pretty darn smooth just by doing this. And it is possible to overdo it. So you want to make sure that you're not spending 12 hours on this thing. But once you feel it's kind of as smooth as it could possibly get, then you really want to stop. You don't really want to do it any more than you have to. And this is, I got to say, pretty darn smooth. After you're done, it's not a bad idea to clean out the pen just to make sure that you get any stuff out of there. Or you can just kind of write with it and pretty much, you're not dealing with large metal shavings or anything. You're dealing with very, very minimal, interference in there. So you can just kind of keep on using the pen, or it's never a bad idea just to go ahead and clear it out. But it's not a bad idea too to take a paper towel and just kind of, press it to the Mylar just to kind of pick up any excess ink. After you use it for a while, it's going to look kind of gross. because, you know, your ink is going to get on here and it's going to, you know, if you're using different inks or different colors or whatever, it's going to look kind of nasty after a while. But it's going to last you a really long time. I would be really surprised if you ever needed to replace this Mylar. Really, pretty much the only reason you would need to is if you lost it or damaged it severely somehow. It is possible that it could bend, and if that happens, if you get like a really hard crease in it like that, you're going to want to avoid using that section of the Mylar. You don't want to be going over top of a crease because that's going to affect how the nib will smooth. And so you can either, you know, just stay away from that, or you can actually cut that off. You know, if you want to store this in multiple places, you could cut this and, you know, store it in 2 different places. It cuts just with normal scissors. That's totally up to you. But with these 2 sheets, you should be well suited for pretty much the rest of your life when it comes to Mylar paper smoothing. Once you are done with your Mylar paper and you feel you've gotten your nib to your satisfaction, it's not a bad idea to take a brass sheet and just floss your tines a little bit. If you don't have any brass sheet handy, you know, don't sweat it too much. But if you do have any brass sheet, it's always a good idea just to floss it out, because whenever you're doing any nib smoothing, there's always a potential for a little bit of the metal to kind of work its way, or some of the abrasive that might wear off of the paper to work its way up into your nib slit. And, you know, the chance is pretty small that it's going to cause, you know, a lot of trouble. But if you have this stuff handy, go ahead and floss it out a few times, and then you can go about your business writing with your new smooth pen. Hello, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and Ink Nouveau, and what I'm going to cover today is something called brass sheet. Now, this is Goulet brass sheet because this is something that we're actually manufacturing here in-house. It is essentially a thin sheet of brass that you use to clean in between the tines of your nib in order to keep things flowing smoothly. So I'm going to cover all that today and explain to you why you need it and how to properly use it. So why do you need brass sheet? Well, you don't always need brass sheet. Obviously, people have been using fountain pens for years and never have anything to do with brass sheet. It's not that it's something that you have to have, but there are certain instances where it can be very helpful for you to keep your pens working optimally. Essentially, the brass sheet is a cleaning tool. That's how you should really look at it. When you have a fountain pen, like this one, for example, it has a metal nib. And when you're writing on paper with a metal nib, you're essentially creating a very small electrostatic charge because of the friction of that metal on the paper. And what's happening with that electric charge is that paper fibers, dust particles, things in the air are attracted to the nib as you're writing. It's really not a problem in the short term, but over time, that stuff can build up in your feed, in your nib tines, and it can really, in the nib slit, and it can really kind of impede the flow. Now that's why you want to clean your pen regularly with water or maybe a pen flush, and that will usually take care of the problem. However, if you have a pen that just doesn't seem to be flowing properly, or if you have one that's been sitting around for a while, maybe had some ink and stuff that dried up in there and is really tough to clean out, it may help to actually have a physical tool rather than a chemical tool to try to clear obstructions from your nib or your feed if you're able to get access to it. And that's where the brass sheet comes into play. Another reason to use it is if you are doing any kind of nib work. Now, granted, this is not something that everybody is doing out there, but if you have any micro mesh, for example, or if you have any Mylar paper and you are doing any kind of nib smoothing. Now, you need to know what you're doing when you're doing this kind of stuff, but when you're working with any kind of abrasive to smooth your nib, you want to make sure that you're using a brass sheet as well, because the abrasive itself can come off the page and get into your nib, and the nib, the metal itself, small fragments of the metal can actually work its way up into there as well. It's never a bad idea to take and just floss your nib tines whenever you're doing any kind of nib work before you begin using the pen regularly. There's basically two ways that you can use the brass on your pen, and it depends on whether or not your nib is removable. Now, most pens out there do not have the ability to remove the nib. So you're stuck with the option of flossing the nib tines with the nib installed. And you have to be careful when you're doing that because the corner of this brass is pretty sharp, and if you have a nib surface, especially that has any kind of coating on it like Monteverde or Lamy black nibs or anything like that, any plated gold, if you're scratching it, you know, that would not be ideal cosmetically. So you want to be careful so that you're only keeping the brass in the slit of the nib. You want to start up here, not at the tip of the nib, because the tip is where the nib is actually touching. So further up, it'll be easier to insert your brass in. Sometimes there's a hole in your nib, sometimes there's not. If there is a hole, it makes it easy because you have a nice place to start. And you just want to insert the brass in there as far as it'll go. And you don't want to keep it at too sharp of an angle. You want to keep it pretty low so that as you're dragging it from the back to the tip, you can be sure that the brass is actually getting in there. And you just want to do it a couple of times until you feel that you've, you know, gotten whatever could be in there. Now, the brass will scratch, it could deform, it could bend. That's okay. You know, this brass is soft for a reason so that it will give before your nib will. But that's essentially how it's done. Now, if you have the ability to remove the nib from the pen, life gets much easier for you. This pen, for example, this is just an Ahab with a Goulet nib stuck in it. Very easy. The nib just comes right out. Now you can actually operate from the underside of the nib. You don't have to worry about scratching anything because everything you're messing with is on the underside. And you can take your brass. You have full ability to put your brass as far in as you want, whereas when you have it installed on the pen, you're combating with the feed underneath there and it makes it harder to do. So if you have the ability to remove your nib, it makes flossing much easier. Not only that, but when you can remove the nib, then you can get to the feed as well, and you can use the brass to make sure that there is no physical obstructions in your feed too. Undoubtedly, if you're using your brass sheet for a while, you're going to crinkle up the corners, you're going to bend it, it's going to look sort of deformed, kind of like what I've got going on the end here. You know, it's easier for some people than for others to use this stuff, you know, over and over again. But let's say, for example, I've just really kind of mangled the end of it and I just can't bend it back and use it, you know, as it should be. Well, the nice thing about this is because it's so soft and because it's so thin, you can just use a regular pair of scissors and you can just kind of cut and get a fresh corner. You know, you can cut whatever angle you feel is comfortable, and then you can get back to it. As long as you have, you know, a corner of some kind, you can just kind of take and insert that thing in there, and bam. You know, you're in working shape again. So this brass will last you quite some time. And again, it's not like you're going to be flossing your nib every day. It's really just kind of a diagnosis tool and kind of something to help revive an old pen. So it's not something that you should really have to be buying over and over again. And the reason that we at Goulet give you two of them is so that you can have them last a long time. If you lose one, you'll still have another. If you want to cut it up into smaller pieces, you can do that. You know, but we give you two of them so you keep one at home, one at work, one upstairs, downstairs, whatever. You know, whatever is best for you. We figure that this will pretty much last you about as long as you could possibly need.
Hey there, pen fans. Brian Goulet here from GouletPens.com, and I have a video here that I've gotten asked about for years and years and years. It's one of the most satisfying and potentially frightening tools in the fountain pen world, the Ultrasonic cleaner. Now, normally you would see these used for things like cleaning jewelry and maybe cleaning small mechanical parts, but pens? Now, I've never seen anything officially recommended from pen manufacturers about an ultrasonic cleaner, but it's a common hack that I've heard about from pen restorers, nib professionals, and, you know, extreme hobbyists alike, ever since I got into fountain pens back in 2009. Well, today we're gonna explore why this is a thing, how it works, and how to use it effectively if you do decide to get one for yourself and your fountain pens. Now, we've all been there. You've got that one pen that's just caked in ink, or maybe several pens, perhaps a vintage find from an antique shop, or maybe you just let some shimmer ink sit in your favorite TWSBI and pulled it out of your desk drawer after a few years out of service. Maybe you're more excited to ink up new pens than you are to clean out your old ones, and you have a whole batch of them to clean out at once. Well, that's where this little machine can really come in handy. All right, so what is an ultrasonic cleaner and why would you use it for pens, right? So it's basically this little box that has a tank in here. You put water in the tank, you throw your pen parts in there, hit a button, it buzzes for a while, you pull it out, and the parts are clean. There's a little bit more to explain, but before I get into sort of the step-by-step of how to use it best, let me talk about how it actually works and what it's doing, because it's actually pretty darn cool. So it's actually using a scientific process called cavitation. As the tank floor moves back and forth at around 40,000 times per second at 40 kilohertz, it sends compression and rarefaction waves through the liquid. During the rarefaction or the pulling phase, the pressure in the liquid drops so that it literally pulls the molecules apart, creating millions of microscopic vacuum bubbles. During the compression or the pushing phase, the pressure skyrockets, causing these vacuum bubbles to collapse violently. So what it's doing is creating millions of microscopic bubbles that implode against the pen. It literally scrubs the ink out of the crevices of the pen that a bulb syringe or a toothbrush could really never reach, and at a much faster rate than you could do it mechanically. All right, so what pens can you clean in this thing? Pretty much all of them, but there are a few exceptions and nuances to it that are helpful to know if you're actually going to use this thing. This is the obligatory "your mileage may vary and do at your own risk" disclaimer. If you have pens made of ebonite or hard rubber, maybe keep them out of here. In fact, you shouldn't really soak your ebonite pen bodies in water for any extended period of time, with or without the ultrasonic cleaner. It could turn the rubber a funky dull gray or kind of olive color. Hard rubber is vulcanized rubber, which contains sulfur. As vulcanized rubber is exposed to UV rays like sunlight, it oxidizes, and that oxidation reacts with the water, causing this cosmetic color change. Ultrasonic cleaners really just exacerbate this process and will make the change happen like over a series of minutes. It doesn't hurt the rubber or affect it structurally, but it can definitely affect the appearance. So that's why you don't want to put your nice ebonite pens in there. Now, what about ebonite feeds? Are they okay to use in the cleaner? It's kind of debated in the pen world, but generally it's considered okay. Feeds aren't exposed to that much sunlight, so they don't oxidize as much. And even if they do, I doubt that a cosmetic change would really be noticed on your feed. It doesn't affect the feed performance in any way, so I think it's fine to do it. In my recent video talking about ultimate pen materials, I mentioned a couple of others that you'll also want to keep out of the ultrasonic. First is casein pens. I doubt you have one of these, as they haven't really been made in years. And if you have one, you probably know it. They'll literally dissolve if you soak them or use them in an ultrasonic cleaner. So that's bad, obviously. And for those of you with true celluloid, that nitrocellulose, I would keep them out of here too. They're a little more durable, but they still could warp or bend with prolonged exposure to moisture. Also, if your pen has really cheap gold plating, the vibrations could actually flake that gold off. I don't think that'll be an issue with most of the pens from any of the major brands, but I can't promise that. Maybe with some really cheap pens like you might find on like Temu or Amazon or something like that. Now, a quick word for all of my pet owners out there, which is probably most of you statistically. You might notice that your cat or dog is looking at you like you've just grown a second head when you turn this on. That's because while this thing is silent to us, it's really loud to them. These machines run at a frequency that is above our hearing range, but it's well within your pet's hearing range. So it's not gonna harm them, but it's definitely not gonna be their favorite jam. So if Fluffy starts heading for the hills, maybe give him a treat and close the door while the machine is doing its thing. All right, safety talk over. Let's actually get to the cleaning part now. So fill your ultrasonic tank with lukewarm water. Don't use hot water. And if your cleaner has an option to heat the water, don't use that for your pens. The cavitation process taking place that causes those millions of microscopic bubbles to scrub your pen, those also generate friction, which creates heat. Granted, it's a tiny amount of heat because it's happening at a microscopic level, but with as much action as is happening in there, and the longer you run the device, the more the water could heat up. And also the bottom of the tank can heat up because the transducer that's attached to it underneath, that's the part that's actually vibrating the tank, that thing will heat up the longer it runs too. So this heat is fine if it's just metal parts, but with plastics, you don't want to warp your pen parts, so keep the heat down. You can add 1 or 2 drops of dish soap or splash a little pen flush in there if you want to help break down those really stubborn oils and caked up inks as well. You don't want to use any harsh chemicals in your cleaner for the sake of the cleaner or the pen. It's the ultrasonic action that's really going to be doing all the work anyway. The majority of the time, all you're going to need is water in here. So to get your pens ready first, I would do a quick and dirty flushing with the clean water to remove whatever ink that you have left in the pen. Disassemble your pen to whatever degree that you feel comfortable. You don't have to submerge the whole thing in the cleaner. Usually just the nib and the feed, maybe the grip section a little bit. You don't have to take the pen apart at all if you don't want to. But if you have a pen that will allow you to detach the grip, then you can just drop that whole grip in there, especially if you have like a cartridge converter pen that it's pretty easy to do that. You just drop the whole section. Now, if you can't or don't want to take the pen apart, that's fine. You can just hold the front section of your pen in the water while it's cleaning, and it'll loosen up whatever, ink or sheen or shimmer or whatever is in that grip and on the nib and the feed. It works best if whatever parts of the pen that you're going to be putting in there and submerging are already filled with water when you go to start the device. And pro tip, always make sure to use the basket that comes with the cleaner. If you let your nib touch the bottom of the stainless steel tank as it runs, the vibrations could scuff the finish or maybe even cause burn marks. And if you're worried about small parts falling through the holes in the basket, you can use a small glass or even a mesh tea strainer inside that basket to hold the parts in place. Once you have your pen parts in there, all that's left is hitting the button. Now, I usually start with a 3-minute cycle, which is what the machine is programmed to run on before it shuts itself off, at least my machine is. And you watch it closely. Honestly, it's kind of mesmerizing and pretty fun to watch. You'll see these like swirls of ink just kind of dancing out of the feed. You can repeat it for more cycles if you need to, which you might if you have like really, really caked up ink in there. Running a 3-minute ultrasonic cycle is roughly the equivalent of letting a pen soak in water for like a straight 48 hours. So keep that in mind. It's cleaning it pretty quick. As you use it over and over for multiple cycles, the water will get darker and, as it's extracting ink out of there. You don't have to be too persnickety about keeping that water clean. I change it out once it starts to seem more opaque than translucent. But you're gonna be doing a final rinse of the pen after you use the cleaner anyway, so it's okay if the water isn't crystal clear, when you hit the button, but it's really up to you. All right, once that cleaning cycle is done, give all your pen parts one last flush with clean water at your sink. Distilled water is best if you have hard water at home. And then you're good to carry on as you would like normal. You can ink up and write with the pen or leave it out to dry if you plan to store the pen for a while and not use it. I do recommend emptying the tank and wiping it out once you're done with the cleaning session though. Otherwise, if you leave that like inky water in there, it could stain the tank walls. That said, we've left water in this one for extremely long periods of time, and the walls don't look perfect, but it's stainless steel. It doesn't hurt the function of the machine at all. It just, looks a little gross. Mine is a Chicago Electric brand that I believe I bought from Harbor Freight online, and it seems to sell right now under the Central Machinery brand, another Harbor Freight brand, but it looks exactly like the same thing. It's 2.5 liters, and it's about $100. So I have no affiliation with them. I can't stand behind this particular device as I would with a product that we sell, so just keep that in mind. And I'm sure this is a kind of a bottom tier grade one, but that's all I've ever needed. I'm sure an active Googling will help you find others if you wanted to shop around, but you can probably expect something in the $100 to $200 range. Is that worth it? That's gonna be a personal call. For us here at Goulet Pens, it definitely has been worth it since we're a business and we use pens all the time. For the casual user, it's probably not worth it. But if you like to wait forever to clean out your pens, you use high maintenance inks, or you like to buy and restore older pens, and you just want to clean your pens, faster in batches, these are all reasons that you might consider getting an ultrasonic cleaner. I saw your video about cleaning new Lamy pens because they were inked for testing, but is that true for all manufacturers? Should you always clean new pens before first use? That's a good question. It's something that basically every manufacturer recommends that you do, just kind of as a common practice. And I think it's a good practice too. Do I always do it? No, because half the time I'm excited about a new pen and I just want to ink it up and get going. And it's not necessarily like super critical required for every pen. Reason most manufacturers put it in there is because there is a possibility there could be some machining oils or a little piece of schmutz or something in there that isn't supposed to be there, but that will wash out and clean out and all that kind of stuff. Most manufacturers are cleaning out the pens and stuff like that.
But it's still a good practice just to clean it out for the first time. I think honestly, if you're involved enough in this hobby where you're sitting here watching however long, hour-long video of me talking about pens, you're probably invested enough into it where I can let you know on the down low. So like, yes, okay, the official stance is you should clean out your pens always with every time, and you should, use the ink that the manufacturer recommends, and you should, always do everything properly. Me as a fountain pen enthusiast, I'm like, just use it to your best, like educate yourself, use them however the heck you want, hack it up, do as many different things as you want to do, just understand like what the manufacturer recommends and what you should be doing. Okay, cool. So as far as cleaning the pen goes, it's always a good idea to clean it. Really, that's just in case you have a flow issue or in case you have something where it's not living up to your expectations inking it for the first time. If you haven't cleaned it out, then that's like one variable to your challenge. Is that always going to be a problem? No, not really. But so that's kind of the approach that I take. Is I always just, not always. Sometimes I'll clean out the pen, but I'll usually just ink up the pen and get really excited and kind of go with it. If I'm having something that's different than what I'm expecting, then cleaning out the pen is one of the first steps that I do. And then some of the times that will actually just eliminate the problem, usually if it's a flow issue. And then other times it won't, and then you know that that's one thing you don't have to worry about. So it really is up to you. The reason I do it that way is because I'm getting new pens basically all the time. So I kind of know what to expect from which manufacturer and stuff like that, and how pens should write and all that. So I know kind of what but if you are like, I want to play it safe, I only buy 2 pens a year or something like that, just go ahead and clean it out. It takes like 2 minutes, and then you don't have to worry about it. With Lamy specifically though, so they write test all their pens, and you'll see this with the Lamy video that I'm gonna have coming out here pretty soon, but they actually ink up every single pen and then write with it with Lamy blue ink. But there's a little bit of ink left in that pen, and it kind of dries in there. So it's got like a blue kind of haze on the feed, and just flushing it with water. You don't even need to go crazy with it. You can basically, if you use the blue cartridge or use Lamy blue ink or whatever, that's fine. Like I guess you technically don't have to clean it. You can just go. And I think that's kind of why they design it that way. They include the blue cartridge. I think the majority of people using Lamy pens, especially in Germany, they use cartridges. Like that's just way more common for them. So yeah, I think it's not as big of a concern, and I've never really heard of any issue with people who like haven't cleaned out their Lamy pen and then it's like this huge scandal of using it. But there's a little bit of ink left in there, so you just want to clean it out before you get to using it again. Other manufacturers, I can't name another one who has that much ink left in the pen after it's been manufactured like that. I think that's kind of a unique to Lamy thing. It's just extra steps to clean. I guess, I don't know, hasn't been a problem. I've been selling Lamy for 7 years and it's never really been a problem. It's just something you gotta be aware. I did a video on it like years ago about cleaning it out. Probably 6.5 years ago. Like as soon as I noticed that was a thing, I was like, that's weird. I'll just clean it out and it's perfectly fine. Other manufacturers, they do test the pens and stuff like that, but I guess they have additional steps or they test it in a different way where it doesn't get it all inky and stuff like that. So you've got to be more diligent about it, I guess, with Lamy than you do with others, and be aware that if you're having flow issues or something, you got to do it. But otherwise, I don't really think you have to sweat it all that much, but it's still a good practice.
What could be some contributing factors to a pen's flow reducing? For example, notes during class and the ink gets lighter. Doesn't completely stop, just fades a fair amount. Okay, so it could be the ink. Some inks tend to shift in color a little bit from when they have been sitting in a pen for a while, particularly if they're sitting on their side or the nib's pointed down. That feed can get really saturated and be like really ready to go, and then you write with it, and then as you're writing with it, it's not flowing and filling that feed quite as much. And so it's more just kind of flowing straight through the pen, and so it could be a little bit lighter. Some inks, lesser saturated ones especially, might be more in that situation. Depends a lot on factors that you can't really know before you get into it, like the lubrication and stuff like that. Even the design of the pen may impact that a little bit. So that could be part of it. Some inks just are drier or flow wetter when a pen's first been sitting, and so it doesn't maybe keep up as well with continuous writing. Sometimes it's an ink, sometimes it's a pen-ink combination issue. If you're using really absorbent paper and you're writing really fast and stuff like that, these all are factors in how much a flow keeps up. So it could be using wetter ink could help with that because the flow is able to help keep up a little better. Some pens maybe just don't have as generous or continuous flow. So the ink, another factor is it could be if you just inked up the pen for the first time, then you're going to have that feed really, really saturated. Then when you go to write with it,
it's going to write really dark. And then once you kind of get the stuff out of the initial kind of filling, then it's going to write more like it normally would. So that could be a factor as well, if that's what you're finding. If you're writing in like a long class for maybe an hour or more, and you have your pen and you're writing with it, and you're writing, you know, fairly frequently, but you're not capping the pen in between your writing. You know, you're sitting for a minute or two or several minutes, and then you're writing some more. What's going to happen over a decent amount of time, you know, if you have a longer class, if the pen is kind of sitting out there, you know, ink is water-based in your fountain pen. So the water eventually will evaporate out of the nib, and it's a tiny amount of water that's in this nib, that's in the ink in here. So if you're sitting out there and it's being exposed to air, it's kind of drying out a little bit, and then you might write with it and it'll be okay, and you kind of write with it and then it kind of dries out a little bit more. And you know, depending on your frequency of writing and how often you're capping and the design of the pen and a lot of different factors, what could eventually happen over the length of that class, or maybe several classes, is as the water's kind of evaporating out, you're left with a little bit less of a concentrated, or yeah, I guess you're having more of a concentrated dye ink solution that's in here, which is going to flow not quite as wet. So that could be part of it. And also it could just be like, as it's kind of drying up, you could have some like kind of crusty buildup stuff that could happen in here. If you take your pen and you just kind of leave it sitting out for a long time, you're going to see that the ink is going to start to kind of like crust up a little bit and stuff like that, because it's just drying out in the pen. So that could be a factor. It's hard for me to say that like, yeah, that's definitely happening, but it could be a factor for you. That could be part of it. And then it also could be the paper as well. So, you know, most student grade paper is not fantastic. So like I mentioned, it could be really absorbent and it has affecting the flow, or it could be that you're getting paper fibers that are kind of like getting lodged up in the nib, which could kind of build up in there and slow down the flow. Because it works, ink, you know, fountain pens work by capillary action. And if I pull the nib and the feed out of a pen here, and there's this very, very thin channel here that allows the ink to flow down through it. So if you get paper fibers and dust and dirt and stuff like that that can collect just from use of the pen over time, that can clog up this little feed channel and then cause your flow to be restricted. So that could be a factor as well. That's why you want to clean your pen fairly regularly, even if you're not changing ink colors. That could be a factor. So just in general, I would say clean the pen. Try that first, see if that does anything. And then maybe try a couple different combinations of ink and see if it's a pen thing, if it does it like with all your inks, or maybe if it's just that one particular ink and so on. But honestly, as long as it's writing, it's really not a problem. It's just more of an aesthetic kind of thing. So,
how do I clean the insides of a translucent pen stained by ink? It's definitely tougher with some inks than others. The specific inks will vary, and so will the pen. Some plastics will be different than others. Usually it's plastic you're dealing with if it's clear. So it depends, you know, and I hate to say that, but that's given the context, that's all I can say. In general, reds, pinks, purples, sometimes blues can stain the most. A lot of blues have, you know, purple or red dyes in them. That's part of what stains it. Cleaning with a pen flush can be a way, or just water with dish soap even can help. Letting it soak for a while maybe can also help in something like that. If you have any pens with aluminum components, you wouldn't want to use a pen flush because most of them are ammonia-based. Ours is ammonia-based. That does not play well with aluminum, so just be aware of that. Physically scrubbing it with a Q-tip can really help sometimes, especially if you got that, you know, a pen flush type situation. So that definitely helps. And then some inks, like Noodler's Bay State inks, actually clean better with bleach and not an ammonia-based solution. So I wouldn't go straight bleach, but maybe like take a household bleach and put like 10% bleach in 90% water, and that can help to speed things along too a little bit. But the bottom line is, if you have a demonstrator pen or a really translucent pen, if you want to change a lot of inks, use a lot of different colors, be ready to clean your pen a lot, because you're just going to see a lot more of what's going on in that pen.